Hey everyone, welcome back to my urban gardening diary. This is my April update, and we are starting off with some exciting news from the windowsill tomato patch. In early April, I've noticed that my dwarf tomatoes had started to flower. Honestly, I was so excited. It's such a satisfying moment when you see those first blossoms. These are the same plants I replanted back in March, and they've really settled in. They're staying on the windowsill for the rest of the season, and so far they are thriving in that spot. They've put on a lot of growth in just a few weeks. Nice, strong stems, lots of leaves, and now flowers. So, we are definitely on track for a good harvest, if all goes well.
Oh
So,
my
La
god.
Nina struck
Oh,
again.
hell
Just
no.
when I thought we
Fuck
were
that.
past the worst of it,
Show
early
asshole.
April hit us with another surprise snowstorm. We had a few days of snow, definitely unexpected, but thankfully, temperatures didn't drop too far below freezing. I was worried, of course, after what happened in March. I didn't want a repeat. That cold snap wiped out most of my radishes. They were just starting to sprout, and then boom, gone. So this time, I braced myself. But you know what? The outdoor plants held on surprisingly well. The spinach on the balcony made it through just fine, and the new strawberries are still looking strong. A little shocked, maybe, but they bounced back quickly. It's always a little nerve-wracking with this kind of weather, but I'm honestly relieved. After March, I'll take this win. While we are on topic of weather, April didn't just bring snow. It also brought some pretty strong winds to the balcony. A few of the strawberry leaves got snapped, especially the older ones that came with the plants when I bought them. But honestly, I'm not too worried. These plants were probably grown in a greenhouse with no wind at all, so the stems were thin and delicate. Once they moved outdoors, they had to deal with actual weather. What's cool is that the new leaves are doing great. They are coming in stronger, with thicker stems that can handle the wind much better. It's like the plant is just toughening up, getting used to the life on the balcony. So yeah, a few broken leaves isn't the end of the world. The plants are adapting, and I think they'll be just fine. Let's check back in on the spinach, which has been doing really great all month. It's been growing strong and steady, and I was expecting a nice harvest sometime in late April or early May. But then, right at the end of April, I noticed it had started to bolt. That is, it began to flower. That's a signal that the plant is finishing its life cycle and shifting its energy away from leafy growth. It's pretty common when temperatures start to rise, and lately it's been hovering around 20 degrees Celsius during the day almost every day. So I decided to go ahead and harvest it now, while the leaves are still tender and before they turn bitter. A little early, maybe, but better to get a tasty harvest than let it go to seed completely. So, once I harvested all of my spinach, I've ended up with about 340 grams of fresh, tender leaves. While we are still on the balcony, I've got to say, the leafy greens are doing surprisingly well, even after that snowstorm. Both the pak choi and salad greens came through completely unfazed. No frost damage, no wilting, just steady, healthy growth. I was honestly expecting at least a little setback from the cold, but these guys just powered through it like champs. They're growing pretty strong now, and the balcony is starting to look lush again. It's always encouraging to see how resilient some of these plants can be, even in a colder, unpredictable spring like this one. Might have to start calling this balcony my little survival garden. Now, let's head over to the outdoor garden, where the radishes are making a comeback. After surviving that nasty March cold snap, the few radishes that pulled through actually did pretty well during the early April snowstorm. They looked a little stunned, but they bounced back way better than before. But since there weren't that many survivors to begin with, I decided to sow another round of radish seeds once the snow melted, just to fill in the gaps. A few days later, the new batch was already sprouting, so with a bit of luck, we will still get a solid harvest. And while I was out there, I noticed something really exciting. The raspberry bush I planted last year, by the third week of April, it started putting out quite a few flowers. I wasn't expecting much from it this early in the season, but it looks like it's settling in well and might actually fruit this year. Fingers crossed. Now, for something new I added to the outdoor garden at the end of March, giant sunflowers. I planted the seeds late in the March, and to keep track of them, I marked each spot with a little wooden skewer. Super simple, but it really helped me see where they were supposed to pop up. And sure enough, by mid-April, I started seeing tiny sunflower sprouts pushing through the soil. To give them a little head start and to protect them from slugs, I covered each one with a big glass jar. The jars work like tiny greenhouses, keeping things warm and humid during these unpredictable spring days. And bonus, they are a pretty decent slug barrier, since slugs love snacking on young plants. So far, it's working really well. The sprouts are safe, cozy, and getting stronger every day. I'm excited to see how tall these giants will grow later in the season. Now, let's talk about my spare tomatoes, the ones I kept on the shelf in the other room as a kind of a backup plan. These were the extras I didn't have room for in my main windowsill patch, but I held onto them just in case something went wrong with the others. So, this week I finally decided it was time to sort through them. I went ahead and thinned out the weakest ones. No point in keeping plants that clearly aren't going to thrive. Like this one, for example. Its stem was so thin it couldn't even hold itself up. It just kept flopping over no matter how much light and support I gave it. And then there was this guy. Deformed leaves, weird stem growth, and forking way too early. Definitely not what you want in a healthy tomato seedling. I ended up keeping the strongest spares as insurance, just in case anything unexpected happens with the windowsill tomatoes later in the season. It's always hard to throw out plants, but it's part of the process. And honestly, keeping too many weak ones around just takes up space and energy you could give to your best growers. As I mentioned before, I picked out the strongest ones and decided to replant them into bigger pots. I planted two of them into larger pots, and they've now joined the main group on the windowsill. That brings us to the total of whopping 29 tomato plants on the windowsill alone. Yes, 29. The other 5 spares went into a long 100 centimeter container that I'm keeping on the shelf for now. Once the night temperatures warm up, the shelf will go outside onto the balcony, and those 5 plants will finally get some fresh air. And I've got big plans. I'm hoping to add 5 more 1 meter pots out there, most likely for peppers, but we will see what space and time allow. It's getting a little out of hand, but in the best way possible. Back to the windowsill tomato patch, and this time I want to talk about something a little unusual that's happening with one of my plants. As I mentioned before, some seedlings can end up weak or stunned, whether from stress or even genetic abnormalities. But what I've got here might be the opposite of that. This little tomato seems to have some kind of positive mutation. Instead of growing like a typical determined variety, it's bushing out a lot more, almost like an indeterminate tomato. But the height still staying compact like a determined should. It just got way more stems, branches, and honestly flowers than any of the others. It even tempted me to prune it, which you are not supposed to do with determinate tomatoes, since they only produce one big flush of fruit and then stop. But in the end, I decided to let it do its thing. And now? It's got the most flowers and buds out of the whole windowsill patch. So here's to weird mutations and trusting your plants when they try to do something different. The windowsill patch is looking amazing right now. Almost all of the tomatoes are flowering and some of them even have fruits. And it's starting to feel like the whole setup is really coming to life. But even though they are growing indoors, there are a couple of little maintenance tricks that help keep them strong and productive. First off, every now and then it is a good idea to rotate your tomato plants. I usually do it about once a month. It helps the stems straighten out, especially since they naturally lean towards the light. And since tomatoes are self-pollinating, the flowers actually have both male and female parts, so they don't need insects or other plants to produce fruit. But in nature, wind and movement help transfer the pollen. Indoors, though, they could use a little help. That's why I like to give them a gentle shake every few days during flowering. Nothing too rough, just enough to mimic wind and help the pollen do its thing. Back to the windowsill tomatoes. Around mid-April, I started noticing the first tiny fruits beginning to form. It's always exciting to see that first fruit. It means that all the effort with watering, pollinating, and fertilizing is paying off. And by the end of April, quite a few of the plants had started to set fruit as well. The windowsill patch is officially moving from the flowering stage into the fruiting stage, which is super encouraging. So, right now, it looks like we are going to have a pretty solid indoor tomato season. Now, let's talk about a little pest scare I had in mid-April. Aphids. Yes, the dreaded indoor garden invader. I had bought a few gerbera flowers on sale at the supermarket. Literally like 50 cents each, just trying to save them from the clearance shelf. They looked a bit rough, but I figured they would be a nice decorative addition to the windowsill. They shared a window with 4 tomato plants and some carnivorous plants, including a sundew. And honestly, I got really lucky. Turns out the carnivorous plants were way more attractive to the aphids than the tomatoes, especially the sundew, which probably acted like a little aphid trap. Otherwise, it could have been a complete disaster. If you've ever dealt with aphids indoors, you know they spread like wildfire, especially since there are no natural predators inside to control them. I gave the flowers a thorough shower to knock off as many bugs as possible and move them to quarantine in the hallway. Unfortunately, one of them was so infested it couldn't even recover. The bugs had completely drained it. But I haven't seen any aphids on the tomatoes so far, and I'm staying optimistic. That window is in a separate room that stays closed almost all the time, so I'm hopeful that it stayed contained. Still, I'm keeping a very close eye on them, because once aphids take hold, especially indoors, they are almost impossible to eliminate without chemicals. And I'm trying to avoid using any pesticides on my indoor plants. From my experience, basically the only reliable method I found is honestly just throwing out the infested plants and letting the soil sit for a month to starve any leftover pests. It's not ideal, but it's better than watching the infestation spread. So yeah, Huge shout out to the carnivorous plants this time. They might have just saved this whole little tomato section. So, now let's talk about peppers, both spicy and sweet varieties. They've been growing slowly but steadily, and it was finally time to move them into bigger pots. I repotted both the strongest spicy peppers and sweet peppers, giving them some extra room to grow. They'll stay indoors on the shelf for now until the weather warms up enough for them to move outside, just like the spare tomatoes. It's still early in the season for peppers, but now they've got more space and warmer days ahead. I'm hoping they'll start to pick up some momentum. Fingers crossed, we might have a decent pepper harvest this year too. I decided to replant only the two strongest spicy peppers into bigger pots, giving them more room and fresh soil to keep growing. And by the end of April, both of them actually started to flower, which is a great sign this early in the season. The other two are still hanging on in their starter pots. For now, I'm just watching them to see if they'll bounce back. So far, these two are looking promising. Hopefully, we will get some spicy harvest out of them soon. Now, for the sweet peppers. They've been focusing mostly on leaf growth throughout April. These are larger plants compared to the spicy varieties, so it makes sense they are taking their time. They've been putting out a lot of lush green leaves, really building up strength before flowering. But right at the end of the month, I finally started to spot a few tiny flower buds forming on some of them. So, right now I'm looking forward to seeing some proper flowers and fruit in May. Things are starting to move now. During the third week of April, I started a new batch of seeds. These will eventually go into the outdoor garden once the radishes are harvested. First up, dwarf round zucchinis. I grew these last year and they did really well. They're the perfect fit for my raised garden boxes. Each plant stays compact, about 50 or 60 centimeters wide, and produces adorable apple-sized fruits. I also decided to try melons for the first time, dwarf cantaloupes and dwarf watermelons, which are about the same size as the zucchini. Then there are the parthenocarpic salad cucumbers. These are female flowering only and don't require pollination, which makes them super productive. As I mentioned in my last video, I'm going to train them up the giant sunflowers, taking inspiration from the Native American Three Sisters method. Except I'm using sunflowers instead of corn, cucumbers instead of beans, and, of course, squash on the bottom. The giant sunflowers should grow up to 2 or 3 meters tall, making them a perfect natural trellis. I planted 12 cucumber seeds, one per pot, and all of them sprouted, which I'm really happy about. Parthenocarpic cucumber seeds can be a bit pricey, probably because of patents, but I think it's worth it for the increased yield and ease of growing. And I also planted one giant pumpkin, just for fun. We'll see what happens with that one. Now, unlike the cucumbers, zucchini, melons, and pumpkins aren't parthenocarpic, so they'll need pollinators or hand pollination. But with fewer flowers, it's not a huge concern. Later on, I'm planning to add a fourth sister to the mix. Some pollinator attracting flowers to help the whole ecosystem along. So that's the new batch, ready to join the outdoor garden soon. Everything was planted in individual pots, not cells, just to avoid any root damage when transplanting later. Things are off to a great start. And that's it for my April gardening update. Heading into May, I'm really looking forward to harvesting the first radishes, and if the weather stays warm enough, I'll finally be moving the shelf out onto the balcony with those extra tomatoes and peppers. By the end of May, I'm hoping to fill up the outdoor garden with all the warm season plants, melons, zucchinis, cucumbers, and that one giant pumpkin I planted just for fun. And if everything goes well, we might even get our first strawberries this season, from both the balcony pots and the older garden patch. Thanks so much for following along on this journey. There's a lot to look forward to, and I can't wait to show you what happens next. See you in the next update.